All right, guys. So, welcome to the workshop and masterclass learning series 2021, presented at the 10th edition of the BMO IFFSA Toronto 2021. IFFSA is the largest South Asian film festival in North America, and today's workshop is aptly named The Pitch and the Chase, to give us a little bit of insight about what is this pitching process, how does it work. We've got three wonderful guests with us. We've got two guests from the CBC, Jennifer Shin and Zach Feldberg, and then we've got Tina Apostolopoulos from Bell Media. Before we dive in, I'm going to do a quick little bio on everyone, just so the people at home listening know who everyone is, and then we will dive into the questions. A little bit about myself. I am Supinder Wraich. I'm an actor turned filmmaker. I have pitched and I have created a series. I know how hard it is, and I know how daunting it can be, so hopefully we can break some of that open today. Jennifer Shin, who joins us today, is the CBC Director of Development Comedy. Interestingly enough, she knows the scenario from both ends as a film and television producer with over 15 years of experience in the industry, including such acclaimed films as Rebecca Adelman's Paper Year and Patricia Rossama's Mouthpiece. Jennifer joins us from the Peabody award-winning production company Banger Films, where she served as head of content and launched a scripted division. Prior to that, she was VP of feature film at First Generation Films, where she oversaw the development and production slate of their projects. Jennifer has also had a rich career in entertainment journalism, working as a producer on entertainment television shows such as CBC's George Stroumboulopoulos, Tonight, The Hour, and Jennifer is the co-chair of the Real Asian Film Festival and presently sits on the foundation board of WIFT, which is Women in Film and Television Toronto. Jennifer, did you want to add anything to that before we go on?
No, thank you for the introduction.
No problem. Thank you for sending in your bios. Zach Feldberg is head of YA Originals. Zach, congratulations. With over a decade of experience pioneering the intersection of TV and digital, Zach Feldberg has navigated the content business from many different angles. At CBC, he oversees the YA digital original strategy and programming team, developing and commissioning Gen Z targeted series for CBC Gem and branded social platforms. This slate includes such titles as The 410, For Heaven's Sake, Kenny and Spenny, Pandemic. Next Stop, my 90-year-old roommate, Save Me, The Nados of I can never say this. Please just say it for me.
The Nados of Duquesne Island. You were right there. You were right there.
Thank you. Coming in, the Emmy-nominated series, The Amazing Gail Pyle and How to Buy a Baby, and many more. Prior to originating that role, Zach spearheaded Shaw Media's first digital programming mandate, including global TV special, The Second City Project, Food Network's Super Snack Bros, and comedy series, But I'm Chris Jericho. I love that series. He also produced digital products and content associated with the company's prior linear series, including Big Brother Canada, Vikings, Trailer Park Boys, also love that series, and dozens more, yielding an International Emmy win in 2012 and subsequent nomination in 2014. And Tina Apostolopoulos is the production executive of Factual Reality on Bell Media's original programming team. In this role, Tina works with Canadian production companies and filmmakers on the development and production of various original unscripted series and documentaries for Bell Media's family of channels and platforms, including CTV, Crave, and CTV Life. Currently, Tina is production executive on CTV's hit series MasterChef Canada, Mary's Kitchen Crush, and upcoming Mike Holmes' series for CTV. She's also an executive on a variety of award-winning and critically acclaimed feature documentary programming for Crave, including Once Were Brothers, Robbie Robertson and the Band, Anthropocene, am I saying that right?
Anthropocene,
thank you very much. Sharkwater, Extinction, Carmine Street Guitars, as well as Crave's upcoming doc series, We're All Gonna Die. Prior to joining Bell Media, Tina was an independent director-producer for a number of award-winning, highly rated reality and factual entertainment series, such as So You Think You Can Dance, which was on CTV, Canadian Idol, and Project Runway. I'm sure we loved all of those shows. I certainly did. So guys, those are a lot of credits. And I'm sure that the people listening at home want to know, how did those shows get made? So the very first question I have for all of you is, how does a pitch find its way to you? When somebody walks in to pitch to you, what have they done in order to get there?
I could speak to this a bit. Being in a unique position within CBC that straddles several genres, and I think historically, when I started at CBC 5 odd years ago, it was very genre agnostic. We were talking about digital kind of as though it was a genre, and I think we've gotten further and further away from that, which is a good thing. But I think, the first order of business with an organization the size of CBC is making sure that you're talking to the right person to the best of our ability, evaluating a pitch on a one sheet or a log line or just like a quick sort of succinct capsule synopsis of what the project is. Because, particularly with the space that we play in, it could be a drama that could lend itself well to a shorter format, likely lower budget execution, or it could be a 1 hour primetime drama. And sometimes that line isn't crystal clear. So I think, the first thing we do is sort of think about which door should we really be knocking on here? And being a team that does, again, straddle several genres, we try to be as user-friendly and candid and clear as possible, saying like, who really needs to see this first at CBC? It's never like, if it goes over there, it could never come back to short form or digital or whatever you want to call it. If it feels like it leans a bit younger, in fact, like more in the sort of Gen Z territory, it might come back to us because that really is our focus on the YA digital original side these days. But sometimes it's not crystal clear if you're a producer and wondering, where do I bring this? And I guess our promise is just to try to be as easy to work with and transparent as possible when you're coming to us. If you have a strong relationship with a production exec, start with them. They might say, this isn't quite for me, but you should be talking to this team, and so on. So that, I think, is sort of step one before it even gets to the point where it's being evaluated. And sometimes the first door you knock on is the right one. Sometimes it isn't. We'll try to help you navigate that.
Yeah, and I want to continue the conversation and open this up, particularly because I think that there's a lot of newer filmmakers who've never been in to pitch a broadcaster. So when I ask the question in terms of how does a pitch find its way to you, is it, as an independent filmmaker, if I'm just starting out and I don't have those relationships, am I going to a production company first to pitch them before I come pitch you? So just in terms of like the pitches that walk in your door, how are you even getting that initial communication?
I can speak to that in terms of our documentaries. I think, pitches come to us in a variety of ways. I would say that a pitch never lands at our door in the same way. It can be, if you're starting out, I think it really depends on where you are with the project and what you feel that you need to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. And sometimes we can help navigate that. And sometimes it helps if you have a producer who can help you navigate or to say to you, okay, well, I've been through this before and this is what you should do. That can be helpful, but not absolutely necessary, I would say. We take pitches from every direction, from film festivals to emails to conversations. And once it comes to the door to us, a good idea is a good idea. And that's really what we're at there for at the end of the day. And so, if it's a good idea, it's part of our job to say, well, you know what, this is great, a great idea, but could you do this? And can you, if you need help with line producing, can you pair up with somebody to help you with that so that we can put this together? That's part of what we can do. So I'd say there's disadvantages and advantages of both, but you as the producer and your skill set and where you are with the project and where it is in your head need to figure out in your heart and what makes the most sense for you. Because, at the end of the day, we don't want to say, you need to pair up with somebody and it ends up being a bad situation. It's always in your hands in terms of what you want to do, but there are advantages and disadvantages of doing it both ways. You just have to kind of assess your own situation to figure out what's the best foot forward.
And I'm just going to add to what Tina had to say, because I think it's similar for us on the scripted comedy side, where I think as new creators, we receive pitches in a number of different ways. And I think as you think about sort of the teams, it's thinking about, I think it starts with, do we love this idea, and do we have a strong sense of what the series is, and does it make sense for what we're looking for? But then on top of it, if, even outside of that, where let's say these are new creators and we haven't necessarily read them as writers, I think where it can be helpful is that they also share their writing samples, so we get a sense of their writing voice. And then another element to that for us as a consideration is thinking about, well, how can we support this team if we really love their idea, and what pieces are needed to help support them in developing a series for the first time? Because I think on our slate, it's quite diverse in terms of where the skill sets are. We're in terms of, creators who are working for the first time developing a television series, and who are doing this for the first time, but then are being supported by more senior production companies. So I think every scenario is different in terms of how we evaluate the projects. But, for us, what makes the most sense is thinking about, well, how can we best support this project and this team in a way that makes sense? And it's a conversation that we ultimately have with those teams in terms of what that looks like and what the makeup is, and what ultimately we want them to deliver the best series that they can ultimately make, and so we're all in sort of that in that collaborative effort to do that with one another, which is exciting. And then the other thing I would share, because I think in the last couple of months, and I've been in the position that I've been in for the past 5 months, where I always recommend new creators to reach out to us and get to know who we are, and set up those coffee chats. Our development team on comedy is pretty small, where it's myself, and then there's another executive who recently just started, Sarah Kwan, and then we have a development manager, Mika Kiernan. And so within that team, you can reach out to any of us to get a sense of what we're looking for and to introduce yourself, because even ahead of that pitch, I think building that relationship with executives and getting a sense of what we're looking for is super important, because it can help guide you in the process of figuring out, does this make sense? And I think Zach touched on it earlier, where I think, having those relationships and building those relationships is necessary. And then we can help guide you and point you in the right direction of who to get in contact with, and if it makes sense for the respective department that you're pitching to. And yeah, I think people should be not afraid to reach out to us, because I think we're not scary, and it may feel like there are barriers in place in terms of in terms of how busy everyone is. But I think overall there's, we want to meet new creators and we want to meet new talents. And, the only way you learn is by speaking to us directly and getting a sense of what we're looking for, and, and introducing yourselves, which is, I think, the biggest and one of the hardest first steps that a new creator can make, is introducing themselves, but also the easiest, because we're friendly.
I just want to echo everything Jen said. I completely agree. And I think one of the things, and being not being, timid about just reaching out to us, I think is a good one, because we always hear, well, we don't know how to get in touch. And it's, I think we're here, and we want to be there as much as you guys want to be there if you're pitching, right? And so we want to hear that great idea as much as you want to tell us that great idea. So, I just always remember that we're always up for a chat, and are always up to listen. And so just to not have that in the back, just not get that kind of, what am I trying to say? That kind of fear of, oh my goodness, do they want to talk to me out of your head? Because we want to talk to you.
Yeah, I think that you all bring up such a great point, because I think as an independent creator, just the idea of even accepting that it's not a one shot, but it is a relationship that you're building as a creator. And Zach, with our experience, it certainly was, I came in and pitched, and it was a back and forth until we sort of landed on like what that nugget of that idea was that we both wanted to move forward with. So in terms of what you're hearing when you're listening to a pitch, and also like I'll take it just one step back in terms of I think I'm just so familiar with the fear of the independent producer before they're coming in to pitch, and you know, there is this idea that, you know, we need to attach or we need to make the show bigger or more sellable. But I think that there is also just a lack of clarity around materials. In terms of, Jennifer, you mentioned, you know, we want to read you. So when somebody is coming in to pitch each of you, in terms of the materials that they need to have, like, is it a one pager? Do you want an entire script written? Do you want a series Bible? What are you looking for at the stage of the pitch in order to understand that person's idea?
You know, I think it's probably different in every case. And again, we receive pitches in all shapes and forms and sizes. But really, in that initial pitch, you know, I think it's good to have a conversation. But really, you know, on the unscripted side, I won't say the scripted, which you do need to see the writing. You know, we do like to see a one pager if it's a series, and just to know, to get a gist of what the series is, and then we can continue to have the conversation once we have that idea. Usually, you know, I think for me, you know, sometimes the paper doesn't do it justice, so a conversation is always great because it fills it out and also adds the passion that people have for their projects. So, you know, we don't need full length treatments at that stage of that initial conversation. You know, we just need to know that you know your idea and you, if you thought it through. You know, you know, I would say the other instances, if it's a character-based series, or you know, it would be good to see that person on camera. So whether it's a reel of some sort, or you know, a trailer of some sort, if that's good. You know, for documentaries, we get that in all shapes and forms. We will get a trailer, or we will get, you know, a one pager. But really, I would say, again, it's just what's going to sell your idea as quickly as possible, just to start the conversation. Because if the idea is there, again, we can kind of fill it all out with discussion. And, you know, as you said, when you talked to Zach, you know, you were going back and forth in terms of, okay, well, here's this, like, what about if you like made a little bit of a, like shaped it a little this way and shaped it a little bit that way, and then it's for us. So, you know, not going too far down the road can kind of not help that process. But knowing your idea inside out is good for us.
And so before we move on to Jennifer and Zach, because I'm interested in terms of the reality and factual space, Tina, when you're looking at that content, because so much of that story has yet to develop and be created, what is the nugget in terms of documentary at the stage of the pitch that you're looking for?
For documentaries alone, you know, it's a combination of things. Usually, right now, it's a few different directions. I mean, for documentaries, there's usually some, you know, I guess unfolding narrative that's happening that we usually know about that's going forward. Or if it's more of a survey documentary, what that theme is and what we're trying to get out of it. We did a documentary called, you know, The New Corporation, and that was a real it was a follow-up to The Corporation, which was a documentary, you know, from 20 years ago. And so we had that, we knew that was a follow-up. Okay, well, here's the state of how corporations are kind of infiltrating us as a society. And so, you know, it was about, okay, who are you going to interview and what are the themes and what are the subjects you're gonna talk about throughout. And again, I go back, sometimes it's about whatever that unfolding narrative, if somebody's going through a journey and you want to follow that, or if something's happening. So it's all shapes and form. Like, documentaries come in all shapes and form. It's really based on whatever the story is. And sometimes, again, if it is based on, say, you know, one person and their journey towards, I can't think of a subject right now, you know, having that person on tape is always helpful for us to see, okay, well, you know, whether or not that person can carry the film, or what their passion is, or what their story is to help us. It's really just to kind of see, you know, we like to see what the structure of the film is, what that narrative is, or that narrative arc is, who the characters are. You know, there's lots of different things.
Great. And then, so with Zach, Jennifer, for you guys, what are those elements of a pitch that you're looking for that creator to have when they come in?
I would start, you know, for us, it's a sort of abstract answer, but I hope to sort of zero in on what I mean by this as my answer goes on, but voice is probably, when I think about the projects that have been successful over the years, voice is the thing that first and foremost is, that usually puts us over the edge pretty early. And I think that's especially important, like a really distinct voice in POV in short form or in, let's say, unconventional formats, because Supinder, as you know, I mean, the 410, it's not quite short form. It's an interesting format. It's a different format, 3x25. You know, it's not the kind of thing that we typically do, but it made sense for the story, and the content could dictate the format and the financing ultimately, which maybe we talk about a little bit later, but that's another story. But I think when you're dealing with formats that people aren't used to, so you don't have the sort of paradigm and the architecture of, oh, I'm about to watch a sitcom, I expect a certain amount of beats and a certain rhythm to it to get me through the 22 minutes ahead. I think when you're dealing with something that's a bit unfamiliar and strange, there needs to be something immediately that makes all of those thoughts go away and just say, you know, whatever this is, I'm along for the ride, because I'm being spoken to by a voice of authority, someone that understands the space, is going to lead me into a story that I'm interested in or that grabs me. And, you know, and full stop, you know, no further questions about like, why is it short? Like, you know, when will it be a real show? Like things like that. It's like, you want it to feel like this is the space that it belongs in. And we can get that feeling pretty early. And sometimes it's not even a script, it's a one-pager. There are examples, and I hesitate to give it because I don't want anyone to feel like this is required, but there are examples where people have gone out and shot something. And, you know, obviously, you know, the 410 had the sizzle, right? And that was already done. But thinking of something like Next Stop, which was a series that was self-produced by Jabari Weeks and Tashan Tapambwa and Phil Whitmer. I mean, we weren't involved with season 1. They published it on YouTube. We loved it. And we just thought, you know, maybe we can acquire this series, you know, and put it on Gem as well as leaving it on YouTube. And then we can develop a second season. And that was voice. That was just something like, we've never seen this before. This is a perspective that's completely fresh and exciting. And we could see that there was a space for these stories about, you know, Toronto Black youth, like their real experience being depicted in a very naturalistic and very entertaining way that we thought would hopefully resonate with that community, as it already was on YouTube, which the blessing of YouTube is you can see those comments and that engagement and all that stuff, and just thinking, what if it's also on Gem? And we don't try to cannibalize, you know, anything, and just say, you can watch it on Gem, you can watch it on YouTube, let's develop season 2. And we did. And that's been in production this year, and we're thrilled. We can't wait until that sees the light of day. So that's another way to connect. Obviously, when someone's already shot a season of something, even if it's a short season, you have a lot to look at and a lot to think about. But you know, there's sort of two ends of the spectrum. And as long as we can connect with that vision and see that there's something there, then it's sort of a question of, okay, well, what does this need in development? Is it someone else in the writer's room, a more senior story editor or consultant? Is it a different production company? Or, you know, again, to the point earlier, is it like a line producer? Like, what is it that's really needed here to just help it get across the finish line? And is there some flexibility about what format this takes, knowing that if you're working with our team, there almost needs to be, because we're so, you know, at the mercy of which funds will it be successful with, you know, how much of a financing plan will be filled out, will there be any gaps, can we do all the episodes we want to do? And again, this is very businessy, so we can either leave that till later, or maybe it's for another panel, I don't know. But you know, all those things go into it, and that's our philosophy, is like, we connect with that vision and that story, let's figure out a way to help get it made.
Great. Jennifer, do you have anything that you want to add to that on the comedy side?
I mean, I think that, you know, in some ways, both Tina and Zach touched on a lot of similarities, but I would say for us, what makes it a little bit different in terms of what we're looking for on the scripted sort of linear half-hour format is that, you know, going into the pitch, I think we really want to have a strong sense that the team has thought about the series and the world of the series, and they've really thought through sort of seasonal arcs and, you know, characters, and really giving us a full scope of what the series is, you know. And I think and I think to Zach's point, you know, so much of comedy, I would say, is driven by voice. And so having that distinctive point of view and voice is also a factor in that. I mean, I think you mentioned earlier, Supinder, about sort of the idea of the one shot at a pitch, which can be, you know, I'm so totally empathetic towards, because it can be really scary when you've developed a project for so long, and then, you know, really there's only a handful of broadcasters, or so few broadcasters in Canada to pitch to, that, you know, you can feel, you know, disempowered. But what I would suggest to creators, and this is part of what we were talking about earlier in terms of building relationships with executives, and even the relationship that you had built with Zach in the early days of the 410, is that, you know, sometimes it's helpful to share even just a general synopsis or log line with us, where you can do a temp check with us to say, hey, you know, this is sort of the project I'm working on. This is the team. You know, is this something in the general wheelhouse of what you're looking for? Because what you guys don't know is our development slates and what's currently on our slates. And if there are things that are, you know, if there's going to be overlap in that way, and we can tell you sooner than later if this is something that would be of interest to us, and that sort of hits the needs of what we're looking for. But also, you know, if a formal pitch can be set, because we also don't want to your point, you know, have you do that one, you know, the one shot, so to speak,
yeah.
and then be disappointed to find out that something, you know, was similar, or, you know, was already on our slate to begin with. So I think there's a number of ways to approach the pitch. And I think it's ultimately, you know, I throw it back to the creators and producers in terms of how they want to best share their ideas. And I think Tina talked about this earlier, where sometimes it's being in the room and hearing that creator's vision that speaks, that really sort of shines, you know, sometimes even above the paper materials that we see. And I think hearing that is really important. So, you know, I think it's up to the producers and creators to say, you know what, this is how I want to best present that project to us. That said, I think, you know, unlike sort of Gem, I think we would need more than a one page in terms of creative materials to just get a fuller sense of what the series is. I think for us, it's more, in some ways, you know, we receive projects in terms of pitches in varying different degrees, where people have written pilots, or they've given us sort of overview documents, which sometimes act as like mini Bibles, I would say, that do touch on things like world, characters, tone, season arcs, etc. But it all depends on sort of the creators and how they think they can best sort of pitch and present that idea. So, you know, there's different ways to do it, but I think for us, I think we really just want to have a full understanding of that the creators have thought through what the series is, and how, I think even above anything else for us, how they put comedy first in its perspective, and how we tell these stories. So that's, you know, it's, again, it's actually, it's not so cut and dry, I would say. It's actually quite quite yeah, gray in terms of, you know, how you can present your materials. But I think on the scripted series front, you know, both, you know, and I can, not that I'm speaking for my drama colleagues, but I think similarly, I think it's good to have something a little bit more in terms of creative materials that give us a full scope of what the series is. And a one page will be helpful in advance of a pitch in terms of just giving us, in terms of the temperature check, but I think we would need something more fulsome to hold on to.
Well, if I could just add one thing too, just I think it's interesting before we get off the subject, is with Next Stop, for the second season, when we engaged with Jabari and Tashawn and Pete and talking about like, what could this be? They were already acquainted with Scarborough Pictures and Amar Walla. We were too, just being admirers of his work on the unscripted side, and, you know, colleagues in another sense as well, just knowing each other, and knew that he was interested in doing more scripted. And it was one of those situations where we thought, you know, again, they were already acquainted, but just the idea of finding this project to galvanize those two sides and to have those two talented groups work together was really meaningful. So that's an example where, you know, again, they had made season one, but there wasn't necessarily a traditional production company attached, but that sort of moving ahead with Amar and Scarborough together, and, you know, with the team that did the original season, made a ton of sense for all involved. And it was just sort of a perfect sort of union that way. So love when that works out too. And that's just a good example that illustrates what I was saying before. So I just wanted to throw that out too.
So Zach, in that example, did they come in and pitch you, or did you guys as a CBC Gem team find their content and ask them to come in? How did that work?
Let's see, I think originally, because I heard about it through Gabe Lindo, who was the exec director of GEM at the time, and he was my boss. So, and I think, and I don't know this because like 1 degree removed, I think Amar shared it with him. So that might have been the genesis of it.
Okay.
And then he shared it with me, and we were loving it. And then it was sort of onward from there. And then we're like, let's do something. So I guess a combination of both in a way, but, you know, they didn't personally bring it to us. And, you know, regardless, we were thrilled that it made its way to CBC and that we were able to connect and just work together and just get to know what motivated them and if they were interested in working in our space, which is kind of a unique one within CBC and within broadcasting in general. And it's been, you know, positive and enthusiastic ever since. So, but however it happens, and, you know, Tina made this point, Jen made this point, like there's so many different ways that things materialize and happen and bubble up, and they're all correct. They're all great. It's like, let's just find our way to each other. And we do these panels and, you know, do interviews just to get the word out, just to say like, here, we're real people, please contact us. We'll, you know, we have a lot going on, but we'd still want to meet with people whenever we can. And just to help demystify the process however we can, because we love to hear new creative ideas.
Well, I think that the one thing that all three of you seem to touch upon was this idea of voice and clarity. And I think, you know, with that series that you talked about, Next Stop, you know, there was a clarity of voice there, which is what attracted you guys to it, whether it came to you or whether. So, and Jennifer, I want to go back to your point in terms of slates. So in terms of what you guys are actually looking for, and because I imagine that, you know, a lot of people listening to this will want to know what you're currently looking for. And then I wonder if you can also touch upon in terms of people coming in to pitch to you, because I imagine that it's not so cut and dry that whatever your slate is what you actually end up greenlighting. So if you can talk to that experience as well in terms of maybe when voice trumps a slate. But I'll let any of you take it away, whoever wants to pick up that ball.
I can start. I mean, I can just speak to, like, you know, what we're looking for in comedy specifically. And that does dovetail into what you're talking about in terms of voice and, you know, when does something step outside the mandate? But let me start with sort of what we're looking for, because I think they all fold into one another. So, you know, on our end, you know, for us, the comedy mandate is actually quite, I would say, open in that regard, where we're looking for single camera comedies where, you know, we don't do multicams. We're looking for projects that are grounded, that are character driven, and that bring that unique Canadian perspective. And I think when we talk about the unique Canadian perspective, we're talking about the people. You know, I think we're very, you know, singularly talking about, you know, who's in Canada and are we reflecting the stories that reflect the people of Canada? And then, you know, and even to add to that, you know, the regionality element of, you know, us being the public broadcaster is also important in terms of being able to reflect stories of, you know, Canada as a nation. And you know, so many times we certainly get sort of quite a few stories that come from, you know, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, but it's stepping outside of that and being able to hear authentic stories that come from, you know, from all across, you know, Canada, that reflect and authentically tell those stories. And then to add to that, I would say, you know, the question of being contemporary and relevant in terms of the stories that we want to tell that are important, that really speak to the why now, you know, why, how is this story relevant to today? And that's really important to us. And so, you know, when you think about single cam comedies, that actually means there's a lot of comedy to pitch. And there's actually quite a few pillars of comedy that, you know, I would say subgenres that exist within single cam. You know, we do everything from sketch comedy, you know, with the success of things like Baroness to Tall Boys, where, you know, sketch comedies, you know, CBC has an incredible legacy going back to the 80s, you know, with our sketch comedy. But the things that we look for specifically in terms of contemporary sketch comedy, and that's all single cam, by the way, is shows that have a point of view and that have something to say. And just, you know, giving the examples, both of Baroness and Tall Boys, both shows have a singular point of view and the things that they want to say within their sketches, which is so unique. And then even as we fold into that and look at sort of the other shows, you know, we, of course, with the recent successes of Schitt's Creek, you know, that's an ensemble comedy with a lot of warmth and heart. And, you know, CBC has traditionally done really great ensemble comedies, you know. But then, you know, even if you're looking at our most recent sort of announcements with the upfronts, if you look at a show like Sort of, you know, with Bilal Baig at the heart of it, and Supinder, you're also in it.
I know, I love that show. Yeah, and that singular point of view is very
a
much
singular point of view, but that's a show that, you know, I think just if you're looking at sort of the general slate of the comedy projects that we're doing at CBC, that steps into the comfort zone of something that feels like is within the dramedy space a little bit, you know. And so I think there actually is quite a big range in terms of what we're looking for. And so what is that, you know, what are those exceptions as it relates to voice? Well, I think that I don't think there are exceptions, because they do fit within the umbrella of single camera, so long as there's a point of view and a perspective that feels authentic to the story, and that will resonate with Canadians, and that speak to who we are. So I think that, to me, is what's exciting about sort of the openness of what we can develop, because there's so much that falls under that umbrella as a whole. I mean, we wouldn't do something like, you know, Big Bang Theory, because that's a multicam show and that's not what we do. But, you know, certainly there are single camera sitcoms. You know, if we look at some of our shows, like even the most recent announcement of Run the Burbs, you know, and Son of a Critch, those definitely certainly fall into that vein. So I think there's such a diverse sort of ability of comedy storytelling that we can explore. And so I always say that it's, you know, pitch us your good ideas. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we just want the best stuff and the funniest stuff and the things that will resonate and that feel timely.
That's great. Thank you, Jennifer. Zach, Tina, did you guys want to add what you're looking for on your end?
I can add that, you know, I think I really love how Jen just put, you know, the comedy strategy on the development side. I think that a lot of the stuff that you were saying, Jen, resonated here too. I think we have a pretty good idea of what our programming strategy is for young adults. You know, we have it kind of mapped out and thinking, you know, what about that sort of corner of young adult where you're just getting a little too old for kids? What does that look like? And you know, a series like Utopia Falls would be a good example of that, you know, where it's right on that line. We think it tips a little bit more into young adults. So that's kind of a tentpole for us on that early young adult side. And, you know, the 410 would be sort of closer to the other end of that, you know, but it's still sort of in that zone of, you know, Gen Z audience targeted content. And there are a lot of points in between. And we sort of look at it as sort of what are those shows that we think will work in each of those quadrants. And it can get, admittedly, a little bit rigid, where we'll think, well, like, we're looking at a pitch and it's like, well, we love this thing, but where would it go within this sort of, you know, matrix that we've created? And I think it's in times like those where we have to snap ourselves out of it and say, it might not fit with exactly the framework that we have, but we think there's going to be an audience for this on our service, and here's why. And then it's really just a business case and saying, like, okay, here's why we think we're actually going to be able to reach this audience with Gem, and then pressing forward from there. So it's early enough that I don't have too many concrete examples, because it's a lot of stuff that's still in development that hasn't really been announced. But you know, I think we're open to sort of breaking our own rules for the right projects, and try to allow ourselves that flexibility so that you know, special projects that we think will ultimately be at home on Gem don't slip through the cracks because for whatever reason we just don't feel that it aligns as cleanly with what we're trying to do. So that's the general approach, but yeah, and again, we try to be as transparent as possible with what we're developing so that people kind of have an idea of where things are headed. And even though the development stuff is generally under wraps, you know, I'd say look to the upfront as well. You know, some of the announcements that we're making will have some very early heads up sort of notes in them about what's coming down the pipe for YA Digital Original. So if you're checking those out and sort of season preview press releases and so on from CBC, you'll see a few titles in there that will indicate where things are headed. And that's not a bad place to orient yourself in terms of, you know, what we're actually talking about and what we're going to be building around in the fall and winter and beyond. So that's just kind of more a tip more than anything, but that is a good place to start.
Great, thanks, Zach. And what about you guys over at Bell Media? Tina, what are you looking for?
So a lot of this stuff applies, but what's different about my role in the unscripted space is that I cover a bunch of different channels and platforms as well as formats. So I cover everything from reality shows all the way to lifestyle to documentaries. So when which is a great thing for people that are pitching, because often, because I'm looking towards, okay, where does this fit? I'm looking across all our brands to see where it does. And so sometimes somebody will come in and say, you know what, this would be great for Crave. And then we can turn around and say, well, actually, if you added some sugar on top, it could actually be great for CTV. Or it might not be a docuseries, but can you make it into a 90-minute feature? And that way it would fit for us. So that's kind of the beauty of my role, is that I get to kind of go across a lot of genres. But, I think to everybody's point, and I can go into exactly what we're looking for, but we do, one of the things that we do look for are those surprising things. And so often we're getting pitches where, something's in the zeitgeist, and, crickets are in the zeitgeist. So we're getting a lot of pitches on crickets, and that's just the nature of the unscripted space. And so, and then we'll get something out of the blue that'll be totally different. And that's kind of what that surprises us. I mean, we're living in an age where, you're on the channels and trying to flip through all the little icons of what you want to watch, and really what's going to cut through the noise and what's going to, attract people to it. And so it's those are the things we look for in terms of content. And also, I mean, if you think about it, who knew that Masked Singer would be like one of the top 100 shows? Nobody would ever say, hey, I'm going to pitch a show about being in costume and saying this, so it's like, those are the kind of surprises that we're looking for when we're looking at pitches. And also I'll go into what we are, what the brands are. And again, if something fits outside of that in terms of just subject matter, but is really great, we always make room for that. But for CTV, it's really the, big unscripted reality competition series that we look at. Right now, we've got The Amazing Race Canada, we've got MasterChef Canada, and we're really looking towards our future in terms of, okay, well, what's our new big show going to be that's going to be able to speak to, millions of Canadians, and be kind of must-see television. And so that's something that we're actively looking for, and really want to look at developing our own formats in terms of original formats with Canadian producers. And so we're really keeping our eye on for that. So, and then we also have Crave, which is, a great service in its platform in itself. We've got, it's the place, we call it the premium, it's a premium SVOD service. It's home to all the big Hollywood movies, to HBO, to Showtime. And so what is the content that's going to separate itself from that content that's on that service? And so the way that we look at things, is it culturally relevant to Canadians? Is it going to make noise? Is it going to be buzzworthy? What's the creative approach? What are those things that are going to catch people's eye? Like I said, we're living in an age where we got thousands and millions of titles to go through. So what's gonna attract the audience there, and really drive either subscribers or bring people to the service. And so we do have a strategy for theatrical documentaries on the channel or on the service. And so we're really proud of those. They've really become the jewels in our crowns in terms of content. Most of our films, a lot of our films, I should say, travel across the world in terms of festivals, go to TIFF, go to Hot Docs, and we're really proud of those. And the subject matter for those really range from, pop culture to environmentalism. It runs the gamut, just whatever iconic subject matter is out there that's really going to get people talking, the conversation started. And then we'll do a couple of doc series, maybe one a year, that's a little bit more premium and feeling, and SVOD feeling. Right now we've got a couple series that are in production. One's called Thunder Bay, which is based on the podcast from Ryan McMahon, which we're really proud to be part of. And also we've got another docuseries called We're All Gonna Die, which is, it's a host-driven series about existential risk. We did not know that we were gonna go into pandemic when we greenlit it. And so we're now in this world where we're talking, where we thought, oh wait, we actually might die. But in any case, we're not going to die. We're good now, guys. I think I'm going to knock on wood.
It's an optimistic title.
Yeah. And so, you know, and so that's Crave. We also, my bio is a little bit old, but there's also Discovery as well, which are really character-driven, big series that are, you know, rooted in problem solving and high stakes. So, you know, we've got Highway Through Hell and series like that on there. And we've just greenlit a new competition reality series, which we're really excited about, called A Cut Above, which is about chainsaw carving competition, which is going to be really exciting. And then we've got CTV Life, which is a great, you know, relatively new lifestyle channel that we're looking for content in the lifestyle space. So, you know, whether that's food, home, anything in that world, we are open and game to listen to pitches. So again, so we kind of run the gamut. So it's a big wide variety of things. I know I glossed over that quickly, but hopefully it gives a little bit of a background of what we're looking for.
No, I think that's great, Tina. And I think it'll be really helpful for people who are coming in and wanting to pitch to those channels to know what that current slate is. For each of you, I'm curious, because I think that, you know, as independent producers, we're so focused on our pitch and coming in and trying to sell the show, that I think that we could really benefit from some insight. And Zach, we won't get into the business of it, but I'm like, from your end, you hear a great pitch. And then what happens? Because I imagine you've got to pitch it to somebody else, or you know what I mean? So somebody's come in, you've heard a great pitch, and then what do you do on your end?
I think that's a great question. I think that it kind of, the reason that we have a pretty strong idea of what our strategy is and what it needs to be is because it keeps us honest in a lot of ways. So you know, we have a public version of that on our independent producers site at cbc.ca/independent producers. And it's not a bad place to start. I'd say there's no replacement for a meeting with us. So if you read that and it sparks some ideas and you want to connect, we can always set up a conversation to get a bit more into detail. But, you know, if we hear a pitch that easily sort of ladders up into one of those sort of areas that we're building on for a young adult audience, then it makes our case easier when, you know, I share it with, you know, my boss, Trish Williams, who's the head of scripted. And, you know, she might bring it to Sally, who's our GM, Sally Cato, who's our GM. So, you know, I'd say it's a pretty traditional process in that sense. It's sort of like, you know, we'll look at a few pitches and say, you know, there are about 3 or 4 things here that we think we should be developing, and, you know, hopefully get them ready in partnership with the writer and producer for production fund, one of many that we're so lucky to have access to in Canada, down the line. And we're not very deadline driven in that sense, because we really want to give the creative the time to breathe and get to a point where everybody feels like this is a strong candidate and will be successful in a very competitive fund to get those dollars. And even that process is sort of like, it's tantamount to a green light. So it's almost like another round of approvals, but really it's, you know, we're given a lot of autonomy to sort of say, what is the best strategy to reach this audience? And then, you know, like any organization, just saying like, okay, well, here's our plan, and waiting for that sign off, getting that sign off, and then proceeding accordingly. But it's a pretty smooth process. I think because we have a pretty tight strategy, it's not really like, there's not too much that comes out of left field. It's really like, yeah, this makes sense. This is what this team is trying to do. And here's a project that does that really well. So, you know, go ahead and develop, and we'll see where it goes. So that's sort of the very broad answer to that in terms of the way that we work. And yeah, sometimes it's a little different than that, but that's generally the process. And we're partners at every step of the way through that development phase, and, you know, giving notes, trying to, you know, help the project be the version of it that we think most aligns with the vision that was pitched to us. And, giving our input where it's valuable, and maybe taking a step back where it's really, the creators to work through. And then, again, setting it up for success when it comes time to try to find those financing sources, which, that can be a protracted thing. And, waiting for the juries to meet, talk about it, and then hopefully they have the same perspective that we do. And sometimes they don't. So then it might be a little bit of back to the drawing board. What's the next fund available, and so on. But, we talked earlier about sort of the beginning of a relationship, and that's kind of what these things are. It's like you start with something and you hope that this thing that you're developing or that was pitched will see it all the way through to production. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but we'll be as transparent and collaborative as we can be every step of the way.
I think that you also bring up a great point that, when I was a new creator, I didn't realize that when I went in to pitch CBC and got a green light from CBC, we would still need to go to these other funds like the CMF or like the IDM in order to put the financing together for the show. Jennifer, I'm going to throw it over to you in terms of when you hear a pitch. It sounds like the team at GEM is very cohesive and they agree on everything. Have you ever had it happen that you love a pitch, but maybe the next person within CBC Comedy doesn't? Like, have you ever had to fight for a pitch that you believe in, that trying to get that creator's vision over to the rest of your team? Or is it as seamless as it is at GEM?
I mean, I think a lot of what Zach touched on is the process for us on the comedy side. I think what I would add is that, I think one thing to note in terms of how we're reviewing pitches is that we actually really do have conversations. And I know that may seem like a shock to people, but we really do discuss it as a team, as a comedy team, and thoughtfully sort of, and as all departments, I'm assuming here on this call, we review it and we really talk about it and discuss the projects, because, the considerations that we know, and we talked about this earlier, is that people put so much effort into these pitches and these documents. And so we respect the amount of time that has gone into this. And so we really do meaningfully sort of assess them in that capacity. Now, that said, to answer your question more specifically, I'm only 5 months into the gig. So, I've been lucky where it's been pretty seamless. And I think that, we trust each other as a scripted group, and, we can make a case for the projects that, we, feel strongly about. And luckily we have somebody, because, Trish is the head of scripted, and, just like Zach, I report into Trish. And so, we have conversations and dialogues about the things that we're excited about and that we're putting forward. So it's been pretty collaborative and great in that instance.
Great. And Tina, what about yourself? You've got you have so many channels that you look after. So what happens when you hear a pitch? Where do you go?
Yeah, I would say, I echo a lot of what Zach and Jennifer said. It's very much a collaborative effort in terms of our teams discussing every project. We everything from again, from the reality shows to the documentaries, we go through it. We want to give every project the amount of attention that the creators have put into them. But essentially, I would say, generally speaking, a project will come in. I'll work with a producer, or one of my colleagues will work with producers, and really find those projects that really get us excited. And then we talk about it as a group, and we talk about it again. And then we'll bring it to a bigger group, and then we'll bring it to programming. So, it's very much a big conversation. It's not just one person talking. I'm really feeling it. So I just, for everybody to know that once an idea comes in, we bring a lot of perspectives to the table to consider the project. So it's not just one person solely making that a unilateral decision. It really is a collaborative process. And to Zach's point, once a project comes in, if there's some interest in there, and we can say, well, again, put some sugar on top of it, and we can do it, then it'll, fit better for us, or it'll fit in this kind of world for us. That's kind of the collaborative process too with the producer. We go back and forth. And so once we get to a place where we know we like this idea, then it goes to a whole other creative and then a business conversation, which can be quite long and similar with the funding process. It's you know, I would say the funding process is probably the longest portion of the process, and probably the most difficult, especially with you know, just working in the documentary space. Sometimes they can take a year and a half to get funded. But again, we work side by side with everybody just to make sure that we're setting up the project for success.
Thanks, Tina. I will say that Jen had to jump off, so we'll begin to wrap it up. I have a closing question, which is actually two questions in one for you. So I'm just curious nowadays, because there are so many ways that you can move after a pitch. You know, you can go into development, you can go straight to series, you can go into what is now called a mini room. So when you hear a great pitch, you've talked to your team, you're ready to greenlight it. What does a green light mean? And then to sort of wrap up the conversation, do you have any advice for producers who get the opposite? They get a red light, and then where do they go after? What is your advice to those guys? So it's a two-parter, and Zach, I'll let you take it away first.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think on the green light part, which is obviously the part that we all want to see happen, and it's the fun part. I mean, you know, we, like Jen's team, I mean, our team is really small. So it's me and my colleague, Melanie Lee Fan, who is the production executive on the team. And, you know, generally it's us aligning on an idea, and, you know, we will, you know, bring that to, you know, our leadership and just make sure that everyone's on board. And if they are, I think we'll go back to the production and just say, you know, what makes the most sense here? And we touched on some of the different models earlier, but is it one writer writing the whole thing? Sometimes it is. Is it a writer who would feel more comfortable with a more experienced story editor? That's okay too. You know, I think no two projects are going to be exactly alike, but we're going to approach it with flexibility within reason. I mean, I don't think we want to scale up into a massive room at any point, particularly for a lower budget series where suddenly the development costs might be, you know, because the development cost is generally an advance on the license fee for the show. So at a certain point, it doesn't make sense to go too big there when it's, you know, you're eating into the production license fee. So we try to keep that in mind and sort of like, what is the actual roadmap to production here? So it is a bit of a negotiation, but you know, a fairly collaborative one, and just like what makes sense for this show and how can we still set up a development phase in a way that will help this get made. And then from there, you know, we have a coordinator, Carmen Chung, who, you know, works with our team, and, you know, Carmen would work on sort of next steps and making the connection to our business and rights team, and just sort of figuring out some like budget and some of the business details and making those arrangements from there. And then you sort of go right into development. So, and then again, I mentioned the sort of longer term production pipeline from there. And that's a whole other thing. So we can probably leave that part for now. And I think if for some reason a pitch comes in and, you know, we see probably at this point over 1,000 new ideas a year, I haven't crunched the numbers in a bit, but it's usually in that ballpark. And so, you know, if you do the simple math, it's sort of most projects that we see are not going to make it into development. And I think it's really just about listening to why. And our strategy is not static. It's one that has evolved. Again, I've been at CBC 5+ years. It's changed significantly since day one for me, and I've seen it evolve. And usually it's a combination of what is the opportunity from an audience perspective? What are we missing at CBC? And right now it's really that entire generation between older than kids, younger than everything else. It's that zone. And that feels like a place where we can win, both in Canada and within CBC, where, you know, we're not really addressing that. So if the feedback, say, is this is something that we don't think speaks to the sort of Gen Z lived experience, and that's what we're focusing on right now, then that's the honest truth. Is we're sort of feeling like, well, this isn't really going to resonate there based on what we know about what this audience is consuming on our platform. And our hope is that we get better and better at that as more shows come out. And again, the shows we announced at the upfront, that will be, you know, will really change the look and feel of our slate even more. And hopefully 6 months from now, we have an even better idea of what we can build on and what we want to stay away from and all those things. So, you know, I'll admit that sometimes our feedback isn't as specific, and sometimes it's harder to say why we don't feel as strongly about a certain idea versus another. But when we can, and when we can articulate it, we make the effort. We really try to say, here's why we don't think this is going to work. We'll set up a follow-up call sometimes and just try to be as transparent, as candid as we can be. And yeah, my only advice there is just to hear us out. And if you have questions, ask them, and we'll do our best to answer them as clearly as we can.
Great. Or take that pitch over to Tina.
Yeah. Yeah. Take it elsewhere. Yeah.
I don't know if it'd actually be a fit for us either, but for what I do, actually, sorry, but one of my colleagues for sure, but maybe not exactly to me. I think Zach said a lot of things that apply to us as well. But I start, with a green light. I think we talked about this earlier. Once we know that we'd like to move into development, and sometimes we can go straight, depending on the project, go straight to green light. It's really collaborating together to figure out what's going to make the show successful. So whether that is crewing up and finding the right lead creatives on it, whether it's finding a director or a line producer, as I mentioned before, just making sure that whatever that production is, that it's setting up for success in terms of moving forward. And that's totally a collaborative process in terms of with the producer or the creator, between us. And so, for us, we are super collaborative also on the creative, but also go through things like the financial materials with a fine-tooth comb. And so that can kind of take a bit of time too, just to kind of work out, okay, well, because there is, for us as a private broadcaster, there is a financial piece to this too. So we have to figure out also what the business terms are, as well as the creative, to make sure that it all makes sense for us and the producer and moving forward. If there isn't a green light, I agree with everything that Zach said. I will kind of echo the fact that, if you get a no, it's not that the project isn't good. It's really that project's not the right fit for us, I would say. And so, and sometimes it's hard to say, well, it doesn't really fit because of X. And sometimes, it's easy for us to say, but we can have that dialogue in terms of what that fits. Sometimes it's about subject matter in the unscripted world. We know that it just doesn't fit. Like, for example, we know that paranormal doesn't work for us. And so we kind of stay away from that. We can say right away, not a fit. And so there's some obvious things, and then there's some less obvious things. And, I think at the end of the day, going back to that surprising comment, that's really what we're looking for. You mentioned in my bio that I worked on Canadian Idol, and there was, I tell the story, when we used to do the auditions for Idol, we would see 1,000 people in a day, and we would see 1,000 singers, and every singer would come in, and every singer would be great. And then one singer would come in and then literally blow you away, and you start crying. And that's kind of what we're looking for when we're looking at pitches. And so, you want our hair to stand up on our arms. You want us to cry, you want us to laugh, you want us to do all of that. And so that's really what we're looking for. And again, and I would never say, if just a no from us means you should give up. It just means you need to find the right home and the right way about it, because there's many different ways and many different paths to get things made.
Well, thank you to both of you for taking the time today to chat with us. And I think if there's any major takeaways from the conversation today, is that it is a conversation, it is a collaborative effort, there is a process. And that old adage, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And certainly both of your doors are open for those new voices to come in. So thank you very much, guys, for taking the time today. It was great to meet you, Tina. Zach, as always, it's great to see you and connect with you. Have a great afternoon. And please say thank you to Jennifer as well if you run into her virtually.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
take care. Bye, guys.
Bye.